and I'll give you an indication when we're ready. Right, we're ready to go, Chairman. We're live.
Thank you, Richard. Good evening. Good evening to the public watching and to councillors visiting and watching as well. Good evening. This is the Cabinet meeting of Colchester Borough Council, and I welcome you all to it this evening. It is a special Cabinet meeting of Colchester Borough Council, focusing on the waste recommendations that have been put to us from the Task and Finish Group. The meeting is being held remotely in line with the provisions of the regulations recently introduced by the government to enable local government decision-making meetings to be held remotely. The meeting is being broadcast on the Council's YouTube channel, and the meeting will also be available afterwards on the YouTube channel. Councillors and officers taking part in the meeting are requested to mute their microphones and activate them when they're speaking, when they're invited to speak, and to turn them off again when they've finished speaking. Visiting councillors, members of the public, and officers not taking an active role in the meeting are requested to turn off their cameras until they are invited to speak. When speaking, speak clearly and slowly, please. To indicate to speak, please use the raise hand function, and I hope all Cabinet members will be able to do that fine. If not, please indicate to me or to Richard. I'll introduce the whole Cabinet shortly. I am the Chair of the Cabinet. I'm the Leader of the Council, Councillor Mark Corey, and I'll go around in alphabetical order. Councillor Fox, Councillor Goss, Councillor Higgins, Councillor King, Councillor Lilly and Councillor Young. So Councillor Fox, please.
Councillor Adam Fox, Portfolio Holder for Housing.
Councillor Goss.
Martin Goss, Cabinet Member for Waste, Environment and Transport, and also Mile End Ward Councillor.
Councillor Higgins.
Councillor Higgins, Councillor for Newtown and Christchurch, Portfolio Holder for Commercial Services.
Councillor King.
Good evening. Councillor David King, Mile End Ward Councillor, Cabinet Member for Business and Resources.
Mike Lilly, please.
Councillor Mike Lilly, Portfolio Holder for Communities, Wellbeing and Public Safety.
And Councillor Young.
Good evening. I'm the Deputy Leader of the Council, and I'm also the Cabinet Member for Performance, Culture and the Local Plan.
Thank you, Julie. And I'll invite the officers in attendance to please introduce themselves: the Chief Executive, the Monitoring Officer and the Lead Democratic Services Officer. Adrian.
Good evening, Cabinet. Adrian Pritchard, Chief Executive.
Andrew.
Good evening, Andrew Weavers, Monitoring Officer.
And Richard.
Richard Clifford, Lead Democratic Services Officer.
Thank you, and thank you to Richard for running the meeting this evening, and Andrew, I think, will run the vote. Okay, so with provisions in the Constitution, we may need breaks, but I think that tonight we should, with one item on the agenda, not need them. Please indicate to me if you're going to leave the meeting and blank your screen and mute your microphone. So the Cabinet is the executive body of the Council. It's responsible for the day-to-day decision-making on the Council services and also recommendations that go to full Council on major policy issues and on the Council's budget. The Cabinet is made up of the 7 councillors who have just introduced themselves and their portfolio and the services underneath them. There are no urgent items, which is item 2 this evening. Neither are there declarations, I believe, but I'll just ask all councillors, are there any declarations you need to give on the item coming up? I do not see any indications, so I will move forward. Thank you. Item 4, the minutes of the last meeting on the 8th of July. These have been circulated and we have had a chance to look through them. I was happy with the minutes. I would ask if we could vote on this or put forward any concerns or inaccuracies we had with the minutes. Again, I see no indications. So I would invite Andrew Weavers, please, to take a vote on this.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Fox,
4.
4. Councillor Goss,
That would be a 4.
4. Councillor Higgins,
4.
4. Councillor King,
4,
4. Councillor Lilly,
4,
4. Councillor Young,
4.
4. And Councillor Corey.
4.
4. That's unanimous, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. I move to item 5, which is have your say. This is a special cabinet meeting, so we are only focusing on the topic of the task and finish group recommendations today, but I am aware that 2 councillors did want to have their say, which I will allow them to do so, but I'll ask them to keep it concise, please. One of them I think is a written submission anyway, but we are obviously focusing on one issue this evening. So over to you, Richard Clifford, please. We have 2 councillors, is that correct?
That's right, Chairman. We have a written submission from Councillor Crowe, and I think Councillor Gerard Oxford also wishes to make a submission as well. Would you wish me to start with Councillor Crowe?
Well, since we have Councillor Oxford here, I'll invite the live councillor to come in first, and then I'll come to you with the second one. Thank you. Councillor Oxford, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to, I was looking at the agenda and it seemed larger than what you've just announced for tonight. So the items I was going to talk about are not that one item, but I will be speaking on the garden waste item when it comes forward. So I'll delay any further till then, and I'll save the other things for another time.
Thank you, Councillor Oxford. It may be that because we've had to have so many cabinet meetings, but we've got one in on the 2nd of September. It may be those issues then, and I'm happy to talk to you before and during that meeting as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Appreciate it. So Councillor Crowe's statement, please, Richard.
Okay, this is a statement from Councillor Crowe. It may be recalled that at July's full council meeting, I spoke about a resident who lives between the Minories Gallery and the Sip and Tuck Cafe at the top of Queen Street, who was aware from 3rd of June's cabinet agenda that she and her neighbours were going to be contacted in order for the council to negotiate with them to give up their rights of way to access the rear of their properties during the construction of the 336 unwanted student rooms that the developer Alumno has planning permission to build on the site of the former bus park. The minutes of that cabinet meeting show that informal negotiations were going to take place with the rights of way holders. The residents subsequently received a package of documents, including a letter of which I have a copy, from a company called New Steer, explaining the council and Alumno's intentions regarding the site and their rights of way. The letter invited her to telephone them for an individual conversation to discuss the matter further and ask any questions. She phoned them on July the 21st and set up an initial phone meeting, but says she never heard anything further from them, but has now learned that the appropriation of the land to remove her right of way is going ahead anyway, without any negotiations having ever taken place with her. 2 of her other neighbours say they had a similar experience. They phoned New Steer and were told a Q&A sheet would be produced, but have heard nothing further. One of her neighbours says that they also phoned them and said they were very vague and didn't hear back from them. Another neighbour had been unwell, had not responded to New Steer. The minutes of the 3rd of June cabinet meeting also show that the council is contractually obliged to Alumno to use reasonable endeavours to negotiate and complete agreements with all rights of way holders, and if required, seek approval to appropriate the land under section 122 of the Local Government Act 1972. This has clearly not happened. Negotiations with New Steer haven't even started yet, let alone been concluded. No negotiations ever took place with these residents. Instead, in order to deliver the site ready for construction work to commence in the autumn of 2020, the timeframe stated in New Steer's letter, in its haste, the council has fast-forwarded directly to using legal means to get what it wants on behalf of Alumno, which is not only contrary to its own commitments, it would also appear to be a clear breach of the very contract both are a party to by not carrying out these negotiations as it was contracted to do so. And that's the end of the statement.
Thank you, Richard. Because we're not focusing on the issue completely tonight, I will say that the best thing to do would be for us to give a full written response to that. That will help the councillor and help residents, and to explain that, of course, we are going to be having further discussions with residents and negotiations involved. But I won't go into it in detail now. We are aware, I think probably Councillor Oxford is aware that that's going to be on the agenda next time. It might be something that he was going to speak on, and I'm not going to then give any further privilege to any other councillors because it is a specific meeting tonight on other issues. But I will take that on board. The councillors and cabinet members involved will send a full and written response to that. Thank you, Richard. I will move on. So we will get to item 6, which is items referred from the scrutiny panel, which I believe there are none. Can you please confirm, Richard?
That's the case, Chairman.
Okay, none, thank you. Moving on to item 7, the main item on tonight's agenda. So before I talk to this, I'm going to invite the chair of the Waste Task and Finish group that we set up previously to look into the garden waste charges and to look into the 5 recommendations in the task and finish, from the scrutiny panel. And that's Councillor Tina Bourne. So I'll ask Councillor Bourne to come in and speak, and then I'll ask Councillor Goss to respond to some of that, and then we'll go into the wider contributions from other councillors too, and then we'll go into a full decision-making process. Thank you. Councillor Bourne, please.
Thank you, Leader. I'm responding to Cabinet's request to set up a task and finish group that was proposed from a scrutiny panel meeting of the 7th of July. The 5 recommendations from that scrutiny panel meeting were to pause the introduction of a garden waste collection charging, to set up a task and finish group, to consult ward councillors widely if wheeled bins were going to be introduced in their ward, to look at budget implications across the patch, wider in the council, and to continue to lobby central government with other local authority partners in order to be recompensed fully for COVID work. My job this evening is to present the findings from the task and finish group that was duly set up. I've read quite a lot on social media recently. I hope that some of you have read what's been put out. It is important to stress that the 9-member task and finish group was set up across parties and was agreed by all group leaders. And that 9-member group consisted of 2 Liberal Democrat councillors, 2 Labour councillors, 2 Conservative councillors, 1 Highwoods Independent councillor and 1 Green councillor. And at the first meeting of 3, I was elected as chair. It's fair to say that there has been a great deal of unpopular press around the charging for something that was previously free. And it's difficult to understand for a lot of people why that ever came about. But our job as a task and finish group was to look at the evidence in front of us, to ask questions, to receive more information, to ask questions on that, and then to come to some recommendations to give to you this evening. It would be foolish to say that that was easy. It would also be foolish to say that a job has been done. What we did have was a huge amount of information passed through us over 3 meetings, bearing in mind that no one thought these 3 meetings were, they weren't already on the timetable. These were 3 additional meetings that were shoehorned in 1 month that were previously outside of the council's timetable. And for that, great thanks must go to the officers who enabled that to happen, particularly Democratic Services officers, who this month and last month have had extra meetings put in the timetable when normally it's fairly light at this time of year. it does take an enormous amount of time to prepare for online meetings. Also, the officers who listened to our deliberations and helped us out answering questions during each task and finish session and provided us with information offline and in good time for the next session. In fact, after our first meeting, Leader, we had to have a 2-week pause because we did ask as a group for additional information that we understood would take some time to get together. And then we wanted the panel to have good sight of that before we came back for our second session. It was a very tight timetable, and I'd like to thank the 9 members of that panel, well, the 8 members and me, for doing that in a good-natured way, because there were many frustrations, and I'm sure you'll hear from some of those panel members later. So after the first meeting, we had presented to us a vast array of technical and financial information to enable us to undertake a forensic review of the garden waste and other waste collection systems that we're currently running in the borough. It's also fair to say that all of us were better informed after those 3 meetings. We were all impressed by the sheer volume of recycling that is picked up, garden waste, and our reduction of waste to landfill, which has to be one of the main things that this council can be very proud of. Top performing, we heard, top performing in reducing waste to landfill. Also top performing on recycling rate as well. These are good things. Not only are they saving the planet, but it also saves on landfill costs and landfill charges, which helps out the council taxpayer. We were very, very pleased to receive from Councillor King an enormous amount of financial information. And I know for some members it may not have been as much as they were hoping for. But during the second session in particular, there is a recognition that the Task and Finish group can't solve all the problems of the budget gap for Colchester Borough Council, and that was never in our remit. So Councillor King did very generously offer budget sessions, budget workshop sessions to go through the other lines of budget that we are currently, or you Cabinet are currently looking at, in order to see where any savings can be made or any charges can be made, or sadly any services have to stop. And this is not unique. We understand to Colchester Borough Council. We are not blind, we are not deaf, we can see, we can hear, we can feel the difficulties that other local authorities are having around us and up and down the country in meeting their budget gap this year, an in-year budget gap and next year. It's the same as all businesses too. Some very difficult decisions will have to be made. We did not reach a consensus, but we were allowed to, as I say, have a greater understanding of the wider budget implications, the difficulties faced and the challenges faced by the service, the constraints that some of the legislation allows us to gain monies from elsewhere. And also we heard about the very real challenges that ward councillors have with getting an understanding in their wards for either accepting wheeled bins or for accepting garden waste charges. Nobody wants to pay for a service that was previously free. We have been very fortunate in Colchester. We looked at other local authorities around us that have managed to keep our garden waste collection, which is a non-statutory service, it's not part of the council tax service, free, where other local authorities have been charging for some considerable years now. However, one of the highlights, if I can call that a highlight, of the 3 sessions, which took over 6 hours in total, was hearing from the waste crew. We had 2 loaders and a waste driver that were very candid when asked questions by the panel and gave us a daily and a weekly view of what their workload looks like. And all of us recognised that the heavy lifting involved, particularly for garden waste in the Hessian sacks, lifting them up over a metre, emptying them by shaking into the back of the waste truck, after repeated movement, does cause issues. We heard from a waste loader who came from another local authority and was astounded to hear that we weren't using wheeled bins as our normal collection method. And I'd like to thank those members of staff who gave up part of their evening to come and give evidence to us and to be asked questions. I recognise that Cabinet would prefer unanimity, and that accordingly Cabinet may not wish to accept some or even all of the proposals, but I will read them out now. The recommendations from the Task and Finish group, which were not consensual, were to A, explore the introduction of a garden waste collection annual membership fee to enable the frequency of garden waste collections to be maintained. Very reluctantly, that is a recommendation. And I say very reluctantly because it's only by the understanding of our current position, of every local authority's current position, that Cabinet, you are making a decision to not follow through, and therefore that gap will have to be balanced by something else. That something else will probably be objected to by all of us. And we understand that you have a very, very difficult decision to make, not just tonight, but ongoing for the rest of the year. Recommendation B is any proposal should not include the garden club element, and instead investment be made in marketing and promotion of a charged for service or saved. The members were unanimous that the garden club element seemed superfluous to the charging element, and therefore that was a non-starter. Recommendation C, any proposal should not include a start-up fee. It's bad enough proposing something that is charged for, but a start-up fee we felt was taking that, rubbing salt in the wound. Recommendation D, introduce wheeled bins for garden waste in ward areas that currently have wheeled bins for black sack waste, therefore it wasn't different, and build a rollout programme for the rest of the borough in those areas that are suitable for wheeled bins while working with local ward councillors. And this comes through time and time again when we talk about wheeled bins, it's about working with ward councillors to see what can be done, what can't be done. There was, fair to say, we did discuss that when wheeled bins were first introduced some years ago, there was some resistance in areas, but those areas that have them now wouldn't want to go back. And recommendation E, continue to undertake an assertive recruitment programme to reduce the reliance on agency staff moving forward. The panel received evidence that a number of agency staff had been employed for whatever reason in order to cover vacancies or to cover sickness. It's a bit, we did feel it was a bit damned if you do, damned if you don't. Obviously, without agency staff, you can't maintain a service. And actually, we know that picking up people's recycling and their black sack residual waste is something that Colchester residents really are very, very keen on and have high expectations. And actually, I think it's those high expectations that have pushed this service to top performance. So we can thank not just our officers who ensure that that top performance is maintained, but we can thank our general public who are consistently on ward councillors' case to have the service the best it can be. So as I say, Leader, we could not reach a consensus on all the recommendations, but we did have a greater understanding of the complexities of Colchester Borough Council waste collection system at the end of our deliberations. Now, I understand why Councillor Oxford, Councillor Lissamore and Councillor Wood are against charging for garden waste collection. Their residents have told them, and to be fair, those three councillors had a consistent position throughout, and I'd like to thank them for that. I understand why Councillor Higgins is not supportive of wheel bins in parts of her ward, where the street design does not permit this, and I thank her for being clear on that. I understand why Councillor Whitehead and Councillor Chua were concerned about the health impacts of the waste loaders lifting heavy garden waste sacks up over 1 metre, twisting and emptying into the back of the waste truck. And I'd like to thank them for their empathy and their concern. I also understand why Councillor Gocher asked for further information on the carbon footprint of producing a wheel bin instead of providing Hessian sacks for garden waste. And I think without Councillor Gocher's intervention, we wouldn't have probably strayed into that line of inquiry. You see, Leader, this was a very good task and finish group because of its members taking it very seriously. My query is with Councillor Goss. Councillor Goss, it was his portfolio holder report with his name on. It's his responsibility. And I fail to comprehend why, as a cabinet member, you would put your name on a report that you clearly had no intention of following through the proposals on. I don't like having my time wasted. I don't like wasting other councillors' time. And I certainly don't like wasting the time of the many officers who squeezed in additional 3 meetings of 6 hours and more and supported us by providing reams of information that each member of that group of 9 asked for. Don't waste my time. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Bourne. Thank you for your chairmanship or chairship of that task and finish group. I think from what you've said throughout your contributions, some very valid points where you've praised the work of officers, number one. And actually, I do want to say at this point, the Democratic Services officers in particular, who are once again at a special meeting for us this evening, have done so last week and have done so with all the task and finish group meetings as well. And definitely to the staff that came and contributed, the waste staff who you saw, but also the teams behind it all. So I'm going to go to Councillor Goss just to address some of those points, and then I'll go to the other speakers, and then again back to Councillor Goss to allow him to feed back. But I would say thank you again for the chairmanship, and by your rounding up, it shows that you've obviously taken care and hard work on this, and so have all the councillors on the group. But I think Councillor Goss needs to be able to respond, and also respond to the last point, where I'm sure he'll tell you of his hard work on this issue. So, Councillor Goss, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to apologise for being consistent by saying I've never been personally supportive of garden waste charges. I've said that from the beginning, I've said it in public, and I'm going to say it again tonight. However, we also as councillors have a responsibility to look at options of new revenue, of cutting cost, and ensuring that we deliver a balanced budget, because legally we're actually responsible for that. And if we bankrupt the council, actually we can end up in prison. So we all have a responsibility collectively. So although I dislike garden waste charging with a passion, I've not changed that narrative ever. So I've actually ensured that we've looked at this thoroughly, which absolutely is about accepting responsibility as a portfolio holder. So I will not apologise for being honest and straight with people, but also doing the job to ensure that we explored this thoroughly. And I want to thank Tina and the Task and Finish group for the work that was undertaken. I was also, of course, at all of those meetings. So it's not just your evenings that had to be put into this, and officers. I was there, David King was there, as was Mark and other senior officers of the council. So it's been a real team effort to look at this, to thoroughly investigate. So thank you to everyone. So just to be clear, it's not just your time, my time has gone into this as well. Many, many hours of time outside of this on top of a day job as well. So I'm not going to apologise for having very strong views, but I do appreciate all the effort and work that's gone in by the Task and Finish group, etc. So moving on, if we remember from the last cabinet meeting, I'm not going to go through the entire report again, but if we remember, we were looking at charging for garden waste. My views are clear on that. We were looking at the potential to bring wheelie bins in, not only because we were trying to bring a uniform approach, because it's better operationally, it's better for staff, better for their health and well-being, but also to give a more consistent service so that we have a fleet of vehicles that are all adapted the same and can therefore deliver a uniform service. We did a lot of learning from COVID-19 when we had to reduce and focus on certain type of waste streams, and obviously reduce some of the times that waste was actually collected. And of course, we stopped garden waste for a period before we reinstated it fully. And the reasons for that have been well published. Garden waste charges, like many other authorities, 65% of authorities charge for garden waste. Some of them have charged for decades. Others have even introduced them quite recently in the UK. And the reason for the Garden Club was to try and actually give it a value add proposition, rather than charging for something that people already feel they get through their council tax, although it's a non-mandatory service, and that's why 65% of councils charge for it in the UK. We wanted to give a value add proposition, but obviously listening to the Task and Finish group and also residents' feedback, some people felt that was a gimmick, but it was in effect a value add proposition with discounts, etc., that were going to be included to try and give better value for money, rather than people just feel they were getting something they were already paying for in their council tax. So I'm not the only cabinet member that's not comfortable with charging for garden waste. I've certainly had feedback privately from other residents where other cabinet and councillors have given their views privately, and they've all been sent to me. So I do have those in writing, and I know people have obviously spoken to me privately. So I'm not the only one to have not been overly happy to have had to even consider this, but I've explained the reasons why. I certainly wouldn't wish to proceed without cross-party consensus, and I certainly know from the Conservative group we'd never get that because they've got certain views, and of course, you know, we have to listen to those views and try and get a consensus, although it is ultimately a cabinet decision. And as I've already said, I'd like to thank the huge amount of work that Rory, Rosa and the rest of the officers, including Dan, have put into this, because it was a monumental piece of work. However, it was a very thorough piece of work, particularly with the Task and Finish group, and you've already heard from Tina that a huge amount of detail was delivered and discussed, including quite a lot of operational matters. So that, in summary, is some of the history, some of my views, which are not going to change. and just a quick synopsis, but I think Tina's done a very good job of outlining the task and finish group, the process, and also a lot of the detail. And of course, the task and finish group was not dreamed up by Cabinet, as per some Conservative propaganda I've seen sent out. This was requested by the Scrutiny panel, which again is cross-party, to actually look at this more deeply, which Cabinet endorsed because we agreed it needs to be looked at more deeply and more thoroughly. So that is what we did.
Thank you, Councillor Goss. If you wait ready, I'm going to bring the other Have Your Say speakers in and come back to you as well. So Richard, just to be clear, who was first on the list?
Councillor Lissamore, Chairman.
Councillor Lissamore, and then I'll come back to Councillor Goss and then Councillor Oxford. Councillor Lissamore, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Corey. Thank you for letting me speak tonight. I would like to start by thanking the officers who have worked very hard, very efficiently, very quickly on giving us certain information that was asked of them at the Waste Task and Finish group. And again, as I always do, like to thank our hardworking refuse collectors and everyone else involved in that service. You know, we've seen with the very hot weather that we had last week, we've now got very wet weather. It's a really difficult job, and thank you for everything that they do. But here we are again. I welcomed with my colleague, Councillor Barbara Wood, to be part of the Waste Task and Finish group set up by the administration. However, it soon became apparent that those opposed to garden waste charges were in the minority. We were tasked to find an alternative to garden waste charges. That proved to be impossible with the documentation that the groups was given. When I was a cabinet member at Essex County Council, we were 1 year tasked to find £45 million worth of savings. Following numerous meetings with officers and a very tense workshop style meeting, we hammered it out and we found the savings, £45 million. It is possible, difficult, but possible. However, when you are given very limited information on statutory and non-statutory funding and contracts, it is impossible. Nearly 200 contracts were contained on the sheets that we were given, but there was no detail. How could we possibly deep dive such a list with no detail? We had an excellent meeting with 3 of the refuse collectors who initially seemed happy and content, but would like more wheelie bins to save their aching backs. However, as the conversation developed, so did their criticism of the system. Their contract is 6:30 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. They actually finish more like 6 p.m. as routes are not sustainable. There are not enough staff, not enough vehicles. Agency staff do not know the routes. RouteSmart, the computer system used, doesn't work. They are given 7 seconds per property. That's van to house, back to van, back to house. Councillor Goss is the Cabinet member on waste, and to speak to you personally here, I'm worried about you. Those of us in the council know that being a councillor and even a Cabinet member is not a full-time job. We all have to mix our professional lives with our council position and our families. When you first proposed charging for garden waste, you couldn't attend a radio interview, you were at work. You could not attend many of the emergency leadership meetings at the start of COVID because you were working. I have absolute sympathy for your position and the juggling you have to do. I've been there at county. It's hard, very hard. But now through the Waste Task and Finish group, we find that the service has been at least £83,000 underfunded for at least the last 3 years. Your budget has been wrong all that time. We were told that this is contributing to the physical and mental health issues of the staff. We were told that supplying agency staff is draining the budget, and it's like being on a merry-go-round. You can't afford new staff because you're spending it on agency staff. The length of rounds are wrong and causing unpaid overtime. No matter the council can't get the staff. And now we have the yes, no on charging for garden waste. You decide what issues come to Cabinet. How much money has been wasted looking at this scheme if now you're recommending it not to be implemented? Our residents have said no emphatically to charges for garden waste. Our survey came back with 92% of residents saying no, 92%. Residents do not want bonfires. Residents do not want fly tipping. If other councils charge, good for them. Perhaps their refuse services are not underfunded. Perhaps their refuse services are not spending large amounts of their budget on agency staff. Councillor Wood and myself were really pleased to have been part of the Waste Task and Finish group because it opened our eyes to serious issues within the service that need to be dealt with before we add extra burden on residents who are already dealing with furloughing, ill health, redundancies and anxiety over what the future will bring. The Conservatives have been consistent from the start in saying no to charges for garden waste collections. Sort out our waste services. All Lib Dems, Green and all Labour councillors voted on the Waste Task and Finish group to bring in charges. Only the Conservatives and Independent voted no. I ask you therefore, on behalf of the Conservative group, to please follow your new recommendation and reject charges for garden waste collection. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis-Moore. I'll come to Councillor Goss in a moment, but you did talk quite a bit about politics there and what the Conservatives believe, but and how they've been consistent and unfortunately consistently underfunding local government to the point where we are struggling to be able to recruit enough staff in this service. But we actually have gone out, and Councillor Goss will tell you, and then I'll come to Rory Doyle to put straight some of the issues that you've explained there and maybe have gone further than we believe to be the case. So I will ask Councillor Goss to do that shortly. But I would say that actually the consistent underfunding of local government from this government has led us to a point where we are doing the best we can, and we still have some of the best collection rates and the best recycling rates across this county, despite all of that. So I hope residents actually do not listen to all of that, which was exaggerated, and actually understand that we are one of the top performing in the country for our increase in recycling over those periods you've talked about. And that's down to staff, that's down to dedication, that's down to the management, that's also down to good portfolio holders over the years. I respect your understanding of it, but I will pass to Councillor Goss to one, defend himself and put forward a picture of how he believes it is, but also I'll go to Rory Doyle just to put straight some of those comments. Thank you. Councillor Goss first.
Yeah, very pleased to respond on what really is quite a politicised attack, really, on what is a non-political issue tonight, because we're looking at garden waste charging and making a decision. Anyway, let me cover some of these points off, because there's certainly some misrepresentation and misinformation in their 3 M's. So in terms of my role as a cabinet member, I deal with it via technology. And actually, all of the meetings that go on, particularly through COVID, were moved to fit my diary. So they were moved to the evening, where they still remain, to obviously be fitting with my availability, because I work full time. It's not a secret. You know, I'm 46 years old. I still have a career. So I'm not going to apologise for that. And I'm certainly not going to take an attack from you, Sue, on this. So I've explained this to you via social media because you attacked me publicly on that. And it's blatantly untrue to say that I haven't been involved in any of the decision making, because Rory and I were speaking every day and speaking to cabinet colleagues, because that's what technology allows you to do, particularly in lockdown and COVID. So I'm afraid your misinformation there has certainly been set straight. In terms of recruitment, we're currently recruiting for 12 HGV drivers or licensed drivers from permanent staff, and those interviews have been conducted, I believe, this week. And there's also, I think, 1 loader position. So we've already carried out some recruitment earlier in the year pre-COVID, and we've now carried out some further recruitment post-COVID, and some of that will be from some of the staff that we employed on a temporary basis directly, not through agencies, to save money, to obviously backfill the 40% of staff that we obviously had in self-isolation based on government and health and public health advice. And we've explained that in public a number of times. And obviously now I'm very pleased to welcome back all staff are now back to work, I believe, or pretty much the majority of workforce are now back. And obviously we're now rebalancing the workforce and recruiting where there are vacancies. However, there will always be a need for some agency cover, because where you've got holiday, training and sickness, then you have to have some backfill, because that's just the way the service has to run. But obviously, as we've explained, we're reducing that as much as possible, but there will always be the need for some temporary staff, whether they're directly employed temporary staff or via agency, because that gives flex in the service. And I think there's been quite a lot explained around the technology, where it all used to be pen and paper and clipboards, and now it is all in cab and all online as well, and it all links, and there's been significant investment. But Rory can come back on some of the more operational details, because I do think some of that has not been correctly represented. And certainly it was good to hear from the loaders, who certainly do want wheelie bins, because they realise that from a health and safety perspective, it's much easier for the machine to do all the lifting rather than them lift 8 to 10 or even up to 12 tonnes a day physically from garden waste sacks, which is obviously most demanding, particularly in the summer. And you've seen the eclectic mix, or the inclement weather that we've had in the last 2 weeks, rain this week, record-breaking temperatures last week. So, you know, imagine going out to work in that, and the guys do a fantastic job. Guys and girls do a brilliant job, and I will be going out with them again soon and taking a day off work.
Thank you, Councillor Goss. I'll just bring in Rory Doyle, who's the Assistant Director for the Environment, which includes the Waste Service. And Rory, I hope you're well this evening and able just to support some of the comments, or support in between some of those comments with information. Obviously, there are some political points that you will not enter into, but if you could help with the service and explain some of that, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So thank you, Chair. Just picking up initially on the Route Smart software. So as Councillor Goss has already pointed out, this piece of software has allowed us to improve our performance considerably in recent years. And as a result of that, I think, as the Task and Finish Group have heard and the Cabinet have heard this evening, we're in upper quartile performance for local authorities in the region. As Councillor Goss set out previously, before this was quite a manual task in terms of routing and crewing out vehicles. What this system allows us to do is to be data and insight led. It allows us to improve performance, as I've said. It allows us to plan for growth, which has been obviously quite useful in the last couple of years by adding properties to routes. It allows us to do that strategically and in real time. It also allows us to do real-time reporting and to kind of have a strategic overview of crews whilst they're out on route, so we can plan and change as things happen. And that's been, you'll appreciate, in recent weeks and months, it's been a real challenge for crews. We've seen significant levels of waste increases. We've had to, as you've heard, bring additional staff in. So the actual routing system has enabled us to work far more efficiently than otherwise would have been the case. In terms of contracts, where crews are on task and finish contracts within the system, so they are focused on completing and lifting materials within their particular waste group. I think the issue around the extended routes has clearly been exacerbated in recent weeks and months because of the increase in materials across all materials. So we're looking at about 40% up on volumes of waste that we're producing. So that has obviously meant that crews have had extended days perhaps than would otherwise be the case. And I think some of those frustrations perhaps were what you heard in the task and finish group. And of course, we know we'd increased the levels of side waste that residents were able to do, and we've brought that down recently. You will have seen that in the public domain recently. So the other issue was with regard to budget. So the waste and recycling budgets changed considerably actually in recent years. So members will recall there's been a number of reviews, a number of structural reorganisations, a significant one being zones and waste coming together. So to be able to track the budget in 3 years and compare it in that manner isn't quite as straightforward as that. In terms of employee spend, yes, we have been overspent on agency staff compared to budget, but equally we've been underspent on baseline staff. So that offsets it to a degree, although the overall picture is that we're overspent by about 6% of the salary budget in that regard. So I think that touches on most of the points, hopefully, Chair.
Thank you, Rory. I really appreciate that, and that's why you're partly in attendance this evening to help us with those comments. So thank you very much. I would say that we do run a very unique system. If you compare us to all the other councils in Essex, that we actually went out in our last changes back in 2016 with a more democratic service, that we enabled residents to decide where they felt they could have wheelie bins, for example, if that was their preference, or keep the old system. And we have enabled residents to have different types of recycling that they want to do. There's no recycling in those years that we haven't done. And during COVID, there has been more waste coming through the system. So I thank the staff again for managing that unique system that we have. It's a hybrid system that allows residents in certain areas to do what they want, and we made that decision back in 2016, and Councillor Bourne referred to that, where some areas had wheelie bins. They've now come round to thinking they are the positive way forward. And also another comment Councillor Bourne took from the group and from the councillors in the group about the understanding of the contribution the staff make and the effect upon them of bags versus wheelie bins. So there's evidence and logic there. So thank you for those answers, Rory, and for Martin and for Sue's questions. Thank you. And Councillor Gerald Oxford, thanks for waiting. Thanks for your patience. I know you're very interested in this subject, so I'm sure we'll have more questions that we can answer, hopefully. Gerard, please.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I am very interested in this subject. The Highways Independent Group have consistently been against charging and indeed against wheelie bins, because that's what our extensive survey back in 2016 showed us, with 80% of the 2,800 properties who responded saying they did not want wheel bins. Having said that, we were going to do a fresh survey this year at the same time as the election, when you're on the doorstep, so you can ask the questions, but obviously that, for obvious reasons, got stopped. So we're working on the current data, which is 80% against wheeled bins. The other thing as well is that I do feel personally that yes, we did a lot of work, and thanks for the officers and for providing the information that was requested, but I don't think it achieved what I was expecting it to do. In that originally, just before it was going to the scrutiny panel, I had a motion that was going to full council seeking the total extent of the finances, so that we and other groups could help the Cabinet and the administration in trying to balance the books going forward with suggestions. But because we weren't allowed to have, or weren't provided with, it's probably more accurate, with all the information we would have needed, the emphasis was purely on this part or that part about garden waste. So there wasn't really an option for us to look at something more significant. The other thing as well is that, going back again 4 years, I was round the budget table at the time, and I very strongly, and have ever since, stated that I didn't feel there was enough spare capacity in the changes that were made at that time to allow the growth of the different routes. And I think that's been borne out by what was said during the Task and Finish group, because some of the routes now are collecting from 2,000 properties a day. And the wheel bin routes, some of them are doing 12 to 1,600. You know, I'm going round figures. So obviously the routes that aren't wheel bins, the staff there are doing more work each day. And but also the sickness levels were quoted, that there's less sickness with wheeled bins, 8 out of percentage versus 11 if you without wheel bins. But when you're actually doing considerably more work every day, those stats are completely misleading. I think a lot of it is around the fitness levels of our staff, their ability to be able to do that job, that the routes are actually correct and not overstretching, because clearly at the moment they're way beyond where they need to be. What I would like to see is the finances that each of the groups are asked to try and come up with other suggestions about how money can be saved, rather than just saying it's this or nothing garden waste. I voted against garden waste charging, voted against garden waste wheel bins, etc., the whole process. That was because I had a parrot sitting on my shoulder, namely Bev, who's the leader, and told me that's what you're going to do. So, and I did. And we all fervently agree with that. I just think that we've wasted time. We could have been looking at a more holistic approach to the budget and what's ahead of us, rather than just the one item and it's gone. And I don't feel that the content of my motion was fully addressed as part of the task and finish group. Thank you, Chair, Leader.
Thank you, Gerard. I do understand some of those comments, and I know that Councillor King did come to every session and information on statutory and non-statutory spend was provided, but I think you wanted even more, which is a bit more difficult to do, but we are trying to do that through our budget workshops as well, and we will be as open as possible to the point where it goes down to pounds and pence. We do try and do that as best as possible. We're very open as a council, and Councillor King takes that direction absolutely firmly, and often does on all of the matters that he presides over, and with the support in terms of the waste from Martin Goss as well. So we are also, I think Martin can reiterate it again, but he did explain, we are putting more money into the service. That is happening because it needs to happen with increasing numbers in the borough, and that also is into recruitment. That's something we consciously did because we wanted less agency staff going forward. So in terms of answering some of your questions, I will go to Councillor Goss to see if there's anything more to add. I'm happy to ask Councillor King to come in on the finances, and I think it's clear that officers did a very good job in providing as much information in the quick turnaround period as they could, and we will continue to provide more, which is a really open and transparent way of doing it. And we appreciate the support from people like yourself, Councillor Oxford, who are constructive in criticism and want to be constructive and responsible in helping us put together a budget in such a terrible time as this, when previously, you know, we've been very prudent and careful in our budget management, and you've been part of that at many steps of the way. So Councillor Goss, happy for you to add anything more if you want to, and Councillor King, again, if you want to, but I'd say concisely, as we've got, I believe, Councillor Dundas wanting to speak, and then we actually need to get on and make a decision. Councillor Goss.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Gerard. I thought that was very constructive, more constructive than maybe some of the other comments earlier. I always appreciate your honesty. In terms of staff sickness, you're right that generally there's an average of, I think, 11 days for people on the more physical routes because they get much more muscle injuries, and there's 8 days, I think, for people on the less physical routes. Still walk the same amount of miles, pretty much. But obviously the machine does the work, not the staff. The machine lifts the 8 to 12 tons, not the staff. They just wheel them, which is a lot easier. And you are right, there is a slight lesser number of houses on a wheelie bin route, and those figures were confirmed, I think, in the last task and finish group meeting, and I seem to recall, if my maths is correct, there was a difference of something like 254 houses. So there were 254 houses on average more on a garden sack or black bag route than there are wheelie bins on average. but that's just simply because it is slightly slower to wheel the bin and let the machine do it, but it is obviously less physically demanding. But, you know, valid point and valid statistic all the same. And I've already explained about recruitment. It's ongoing. It's actually happening at this minute, which is really positive, and, you know, hoping to welcome 12 new HGV drivers, another loader, and then obviously we've met our permanent headcount. Of course, last time we did some recruitment, then we then had a couple of resignations because HGV drivers are in demand. You know, particularly through COVID, they were in demand because obviously they were key workers. So, you know, salaries have been increasing in those areas. So again, you know, we have to remain competitive, but also be respectful of our budget. Happy for Rory to come in on any other operational detail that may need answering that he will have his expertise on.
Thank you, Martin. Happy to bring Rory in if he wants to. One thing I would say was really positive that you and the team have led on was actually asking loaders to take the HGV license test and to support them through that and pay for that. That is something we were promoting, was it not? Can you just confirm that? I think it was a good policy.
Yes, it was. For people that wanted career progression, that's a natural way to obviously get qualified, and then they can become a team leader as well. So they've done the job and then they've in effect been promoted through the ranks, and I think that's fantastic. And it means we keep that expertise, but also show that you can actually be promoted just because you don't have an HGV license. And it's quite a difficult thing to get qualified in. It's, you know, it's not a 5-minute job, and it's not it's not insignificant in cost and time. So yeah, investing in our staff is key to keep them and promote them, and that's key for any organisation.
Thank you. I'll come to Councillor King shortly. Rory, is there anything more you wanted to add from a service point of view? No pressure to do so.
I think the only thing to add, Chair, would be just to highlight to Cabinet the investment that's previously been made in additional vehicles to account for growth. So Councillor Oxford talked about the need to be able to grow somewhat. So there has been investment in 2 additional vehicles since 2019, and there is provision within the MTTF for a further vehicle to be added in 22-23.
Thank you, Rory. Councillor King, do you want to add anything more about the finances at all?
I do, Leader. I think that's right to deal with this now, in fairness to Councillor Lissamore and Councillor Oxford. I'd like to acknowledge for both of you making the observations you have. I absolutely understand there's no such thing as too much information too early until you get it. And 1,100 line items without an explanation, which will be inevitable, and that kind of granularity, in my view, wouldn't have helped. But we did share what we could then. I did share what we had then. And I think collectively, we've rather lost sight of the fact that we've had several goes at this. So we've had a session in scrutiny. We've gone to the task and finish group, which is certainly, I think everybody's accepted this, given a great deal of information around the cost of that service, and provided quite a lot of high quality. Certainly that was the feedback on the day and later around the context. And we've had the first of what will be at least 3 member workshops. And Sue, I'll just say to you, I've had some of your colleagues say that's a very professional way of going about it, because politics to one side, there is an acceptance that there is a cycle of information gathering and sharing, and you can have a debate about that, but at least demonstrably we've been doing our very best to do that. And I know that you also would understand, everybody will understand, that our staff deserve to be told about what's coming to them ahead of at least the risk of this becoming wider public knowledge. So we're doing this as fast as we can. It is an iterative process I've described before. I hope, Sue, it's true, but I think it would be true for some of your colleagues that they would see the need for the organisation to own a change. And if it's not owned by the organisation, then it will be less effective in its delivery. So, as I say, we're given the challenge to our senior teams and officers. It's been cascaded down. They know they have to get as much cost out with least impact. I'll not repeat all the things I've said and shown you before. That work's well underway. I'll touch on that, the early progress later. The promise is still the same. As swiftly as we can, sensibly, we're sharing this. And certainly some members have come back to say that they appreciate that. There weren't many there on the first workshop, and I understand why, that there's a conflict in the diaries for many. That unavoidably happens, but there will be other opportunities. So I hope that we will have more opportunity for contribution constructively. I've written to all members, I'll just remind you, and I can tell you that apart from thank you very much, that's very professional and or interesting from sad people like me, there's not been a lot else back. I would like to just acknowledge the point about budgetary controls in the garden waste area. There is no question that I, representing, as far as I'm concerned, the whole of the council when it comes to ensuring that budgetary matters are run well, don't like to see overspend, curiously. But it's inevitable given the volatility of service and circumstance. And I think that's widely accepted. And as described by Rory, 6% to me on the employee cost line, well, I'd rather not see it, but it's not an unreasonable variable. And of course, you will know that it fits in terms of the whole. I could pick any slice of Essex County Council's budget. It wouldn't be fair because there will be the same kind of variables there in response to circumstance. So I take the observation, but I put it back to you that in the round, acknowledged in the council chamber, this administration rightly has been, and I say the same thing, small c conservative in its prudence about how it runs itself. And that's had widespread support, which is a minority administration, which I freely and often admit is the case. We have to act for everybody. And some of your senior colleagues have privately, it's true, so I won't name them, said to me, of course we agree with nearly all that you're doing. Because what we're seeking to do is good sense, common sense, and should command support. But I understand it's more than that. I understand it's politics. Last point, Sue, is on that £45 million challenge. I don't know when that was, but relative to what I understand is the size of the budget, about 2 billion, it's an enormous budget, but enormous responsibilities for you and your colleagues on the county. That's about 2.5%. I'd take that problem because that's about a quarter of what we have this year and about an eighth of what we have next year, and it rises. So the way of working, there may be something for us to listen to. I'm happy to talk to you offline if you've got something to suggest to me, because I'm open to constructive ideas that help us get through this. But the reality is the scale is very different, and that makes everybody's life that much more difficult in coming to a conclusion. To Gerard, my thanks as always for how constructive you are, for the experience you shared with us at the Task and Finish Group around staff and recruitment, which you repeated to me offline. We are clearly listening to that, and you heard then and since that absolutely the team get that, and in-house is absolutely the priority. I don't want to repeat what I said earlier, but my promise is still the same. This is not about that or this and that's it. Garden waste is one part of a much bigger challenge on which we're going to come to a view tonight. We'll still be left with the balance of it, and as I've described to Sue and colleagues, we're going to work that through as open as we can, and you at the budget table would be great. So that's it. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, David. Always constructive there. So thanks for your help on that. I'm going to finally move to Councillor Paul Dundas, and then we will go to the main decision-making discussion and be as concise as possible.
Thank you, Chair. I promise I shall be concise. I think to a certain extent, I've seen the press release. This evening is perhaps a little bit academic. Looking at it, I think you've probably got 3 options, maybe 4 options. One is to accept the portfolio holder recommendation. One is to accept the Task and Finish Group recommendation. One is to accept neither recommendation and do nothing, or accept the original plan, which came to Cabinet back in July. Now, I'm just looking at it from the point of view of what's presented in the papers, in the agenda papers. I wasn't on the Task and Finish Group, so I'm not to comment on that. But I'm looking at it from the point of view that the main motivation is revenue. I realise there may be other knock-on effects to a garden waste charge, but that's what we've been talking about this evening. So we're looking at it from that point of view. And I think for you to make that decision, you need to know exactly what that benefit is. Now, in the papers, I can see 2 figures. I can see for 21-22, I can see that in the medium-term financial forecast, the benefit is 550,000. In the original report we looked at in Scrutiny, in paragraph 9.12, it is 1.126 million. So my question is, for the 21-22 budget, what is the expected benefit revenue-wise, net revenue benefit, which is how it's described, you are actually considering? Now, the other thing, of course, it's gone through the Task and Finish group and they have made changes. They have removed the Garden Club, they have removed the setup fees. Presumably that will have had an effect upon the net revenue. So again, if you accept the Task and Finish group recommendation, what is the figure? What is your expected net revenue? Because I can't see it in the papers. And if it's not in the papers, how can you make a decision? We did speak in Scrutiny a lot about the break-even point and the potential revenue. I think we established the break-even point as a 25% take-up. We argued about whether 50%, which was predicted, was realistic or not. I'm not going to debate that again. I know it is lower in some authorities, but I do accept maybe Colchester is a bit different. But when we asked the specific question in Scrutiny, well, why do you think it will be 50% in Colchester and will do so much better? The answer which came back was because of the Garden Club, because it has knock-on benefits and therefore it's an overall more appealing thing. That was the answer given. You can watch the video back. So if you remove the Garden Club, you are removing the main thing you have said, which is going to give you a much better take-up than other authorities. And that is the recommendation from the Task and Finish group. So again, my question is, if you accept the recommendation from the Task and Finish group, what is the new expected take-up having removed the Garden Club? And if you don't know the answer to that, how can you predict the revenue and how can you make a decision? Now, maybe you do know it, but it's not in the agenda papers. On wheelie bins, all I will say is we know that there are wide views, mixed views out there on them. They're a little bit like the street lights. You can go out and do surveys and you've got 50% in favour of one thing and 50% in favour of the other. But as Councillor Corey said, in 2016, the administration basically made a deal with people that you wouldn't impose wheelie bins and you would do it by consent. And if you change that view, and if you change that very quickly in the space of a month, you know, don't be surprised if you get it in the neck from residents, because you told them one thing and then you've quickly reversed that and done something else. But if you really, really believe wheelie bins are the answer, and I accept there are arguments for them, and I also accept I've got residents as well who really want them, who haven't got them, you need to go out and sell it and explain why. You know, you've got 24, well, I think it's 24, sometimes it seems like 23 or 22 councillors in your groups. Tell every one of them, wheelie bins are great. You need to get out there and sell them to your residents. And then when you bring them in, you might have already sold it, or you might get surveys back saying, yeah, actually, we've thought about it and we've seen the arguments. Perhaps they are a good idea after all. But if you just bring it in with no forewarning or no preparing of the ground or no selling of the idea or getting your own councillors on board for it, you will, I don't know why I'm giving political advice, but you will get in political trouble over it. So if that's really what you think, that's what you need to do. Yeah, you know, I assume you're going to make the decision the press release said, but for the sake of regularity, when you're looking at this, you really need to know what the effect of adopting the Task and Finish group recommendations are on your take-up and on your revenue, and where that leaves the net revenue benefit for the forthcoming or the budgets going forward, to be able to make a proper judgment, in my opinion. But thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. Many of those options we have discussed and looked through. I think you're right, the shifting sands do make it more difficult for us, but we have been through this. There are a number of meetings, public and Task and Finish group and private as well, where we have discussed a lot of the options and actually factored in different pricing, whether membership or not, or upfront. But I do understand what you're saying there. But also, we weren't going to impose wheelie bins. That's not what we were looking at. Instead, it was an optional service that was on the table. So that's why actually I would disagree with you there, but I would take your point about asking people. That's what we've done before, and we will continue to look at the logic and the evidence of wheelie bins, because from the officers from the members of staff on the ground and from the group evidence, it's clear that we understand and empathise, and that is a better system. But I know from streets in my ward that people would not want them. I won't go into that debate even, sorry. So what I would do is see if Councillor Goss wants to add anything more there, but I would like to go to our discussion, because I know people want to have their say, and I know that we have got a recommendation I think Councillor Goss will be putting forward. So Councillor Goss, to you next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Nothing further to add to that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. What I would say then is if we could go to you, Councillor Goss, just to summarise everything that's been talked about there, and we will then go around the table speaking to other councillors as well.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously we've had a debate, we've gone through the detail, and tonight we need to make obviously a formal decision based on all the hard work that everyone's put in, including all the staff, the task and finish group. Obviously we've listened to feedback from residents as well, which have come in via various means, and I think it's now important to just go around the cabinet and have a discussion and views from colleagues.
Thank you. And I think you said at the start earlier that without consensus from the group, you're minded that, as it said in the statement we've put out publicly, not to go forward with the proposal. But I will go to other councillors as they indicate now, and I'll just check for raised hands. So I have Councillor Young and Councillor King. Councillor Young, please.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I think it's been a really interesting discussion so far. And I just want to have a few words about the past, really. We've got 6 wards in the borough that have wheelie bins. And I remember the discussions that took place at the time that they were brought in. And, you know, there was a range of opinions. And we've got 6 wards that currently have wheelie bins. So it's important to listen to the views of individual residents. And I think it's important to listen to the views of individual ward representatives as well. And just speaking from my own perspective, Greenstead ward does have wheelie bins. But Longridge, for example, was considered not suitable for wheelie bins because a lot of it is built on slopes, which clearly wouldn't be suitable to have that wheelie bin. So there is not only environmental considerations, but there are personal issues. I think, you know, if you've got a disability, it might be difficult to push a wheelie bin. And there are, you know, issues around storage as well. So for every individual, it's going to be different, and we have to take account of those complexities with any new system that we might introduce. That said, I think the Labour group are fairly consistent in being pro wheelie bins. And we're pro wheelie bins because of 3 reasons, really. We're pro because of not only the health and safety of our staff, which is a primary consideration. And in terms of our duty towards the health and fitness of our staff, we have to take that seriously. We don't want to run an authority where people are sustaining injury as a result of doing their daily work. And if we don't tackle that, then we're not being fair to those members of staff, and we shouldn't be operating a system which actually results in people being off sick. Not only is that budgetary difficult for us, but it's obviously detrimental to the well-being of those individuals. And I'm really proud of the approach we have in terms of health and well-being to our members of staff. And we've built on that in recent years in terms of offering physio and particularly psychological counselling services to people with mental health problems, as we should. But we don't want our staff to get injured as a result of doing their job. So all we can do to minimise that, we should be doing. With COVID, I think wheelie bins do provide a much more secure receptacle to keep waste safe. And we know that split bags create a lot of environmental harm, which of course our neighbourhood teams have to deal with and come and litter pick. So that's a consideration as well. So health and safety of residents, health and safety of staff. And I guess that really is why the Labour group is very pro wheelie bins. But as I said, there's a range of opinions about that, but we have to move forward and try and work with the communities that we might want to bring wheelie bins into, and actually take account of the certain, difficulties of those areas and the individuals as well. So 6 areas of the borough have wheelie bins and the rest don't. Talking about charging for garden waste, I think Sue has made this quite a political issue, and I think some of the Conservative councillors have made it a very political issue. But there's no consistency actually. If you look at the 12 nearest neighbours, you've got the Labour authorities that do charge, like Harlow. You've got Labour authorities such as Ipswich that don't charge. And actually 7 out of the 12 near neighbours that do charge, and the majority of them are Conservative run authorities. So if you lived in Elmsted Market, you would be sitting in tendering ward and you would be paying for your garden waste. If you live in Wivenhoe, a couple of miles away, you wouldn't be paying. And leader, we have to think about the future as well. We may be in a unitary authority with tendering quite often. It's quite obvious that we may be in a unitary authority with tendering, and then we're going to have some consistency there. And they at the moment charge, Braintree don't. So maybe tendering will get lucky and not have charges, but maybe we'll go in line with tendering. We'll have to wait and see how that pans out. But in September, which is a couple of weeks away, we might know more about that. So we shouldn't get too excited about our decision tonight, because it might change again in the near future. So I kind of talked about most of the things I wanted to actually mention, but as others have said, as a responsible authority, we have to balance the budget, and that problem is not going to go away. So whatever we decide tonight, it doesn't mean that, it's all fine and we don't have to think about this. We do have to think about it, and somehow we have to make the budget stretch to do the things that we need to do. And garden waste charges is a discretionary service. I'll be interested to hear what others have got to say, and I'll leave it there for the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Young. I have Councillor King next, please.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Deputy Leader. Thank you, Julie. That's a very fair balancing about the realities of charging and disparity. The politics is understood here, but the reality is that every local authority has the same duty to balance its books on revenue, and it does, or it finds itself in the deepest of hot water. We will balance the books, despite the fact we're being caught by the economic and the health crisis that has so demonstrably cut away at our income, like other local authorities. But we've done exceptionally well in the past, and we will again in the future. We've just got a very difficult interregnum between where we were raising income really effectively and the future we're going to get back to, which is government. It's a non-political point, just a reality. Governments set the rules, and the rules are balance the books and raise the money. So we balance the books and we raise the money. and then we'll have to find our way through this. But Councillor Young is absolutely right to point out the challenge doesn't go if the collective will is to stop now, pause, reflect. I'm going to ask for a reminder for us of where we stand at the moment. Hayley, you've got a couple of slides. Could you just put up the ones about the budget gap? Thank you. These numbers, please do take them as indicative. Go back one, please. Thank you. So this is from the section 151 officer. I can tell you the numbers will be different the time they come through to us more formally, but this is just an indicator. This year, the £2 million problem we've talked about is being resolved by the use of reserves as well as by immediate in-house action. Next slide, please. Thank you. And this is to answer, but Councillor Dundas is not with us, what those of us in the budget area were assuming might come through. It would depend on the final model if garden waste charges were introduced, and it's sort of in a running year, if you like, the better part of £1 million or more, which I think was one of the numbers he mentioned. I do take the point. We all do. It does depend on what you finally settle on. Should say that it was absolutely right. The Task and Finish group looked at the variables. So that for me was never an issue. What was clear was that the Task and Finish group, if they could have had consensus and put a recommendation, they would have made a contribution, this million or more, or a part of it. Thank you, and take that down. Thank you, Hayley. The reason I flag it is just because, as Councillor Young has said, our conversations had better be soberly set. And I say this, and Sue, you're, I think, the last of your colleagues here, because you will understand in your heart and in your head the reality that you could be running the administration. So we're talking about your future, the future of the culture stick, clearly, which is more important than any of us. You know, what we do as collectively as we can is about finding our way out and still providing what a high quality, and it is, high performing, and it is, look at the list of awards, and well regarded by its customers who use that, those who use the service. That's what they say to us. This council, credit to the officers, some to the politicians, works really well. We want to preserve the best of that. So the journey ahead is about doing that, and we've started. What I didn't show on that slide was where we're at, and the answer is we're about halfway through next year's problem. So at the moment, I expect to see proposals come through that will take a couple £1 million off that challenge. That's encouraging, but we need to understand that what follows with that is the use of reserves, which by our past prudence we have to sort of close the gap whilst we go round the buoy again with least impact on residents and least impact upon those who provide the service. I want to just address a couple of points, Leader, and I'll just come to a close because the evening is going on and we've kind of signalled where we're heading. So there is I'm up for any kind of sharp observation, but I do like to keep it factual. So Hayley, could you just put up the third slide? Thank you. I do have some on garden waste. I'm that sad. I want to see how we stand. And we actually would have stood very well if we put our proposals into context inclusive of garden waste, but on the assumption that may not be the decision, he says. Now, this is just a reminder against our peers of where we stand. And it's a lovely green colour. You know, this is a local authority that by its peers is seen to be well performing, by its public, whatever the grumbles, often they'll have a point, over the moment works well for its residents. This confirms the point again that in total and in terms of increase, we're not, as some suggest, you know, money raiders. We don't want to take money from our residents. We provide a great deal in terms of high quality events and services which earn us income. So providing things people want for which they'll pay and which reduces the impact upon them is a good model. And thank you, Hayley. You can take it down now. The point I make, I hope, is really clear. It is not reasonable to suggest that we're a high tax authority. We are not. So to the conclusion, my job for you as a colleague is to say the facts, and the facts I've shown. We've got a long way to go to close the books, even if the couple million or so that we're talking about, which is yet to be confirmed, can be delivered. We've still got a long way to go, but it is progress, and we should hope to do better. So my conclusion, in the circumstances we're in, given we are a consensual local authority administration, given that we wanted consensus, and given that we gave the challenge of crafting that to the chair, and bless you, Tina Bourne, for doing your best in the circumstances to create it. My suggestion is that what we do is ask the task force group to return to the subject next year. We will then be better placed to see where we are on the finances. And for those who are prepared to spend some more time on this, but under less pressure, pick up some of the learning that we've undoubtedly got, and undoubtedly some of the things that we will have addressed between now and whenever we return to the subject, and stop this now, as is the portfolio holder's recommendation. But as I say, accept that we've still got that overriding duty to balance the books, and if we need to be prepared to return to the subject again. That's it for me. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, David, for that analysis of the finances and the fact that we need to return to looking at any tough decision. But I think we are doing well already in that process of reducing costs and looking at areas where we can bring in more income. But quite frankly, where the government has not kept its promise, we are in a worse situation. But thank you for that, and thank you for backing up what Councillor Goss has put forward at the moment. So I'll move to Councillor Fox, please.
Thank you very much, Leader. I think what I'd like to start by doing is thanking Councillor Bourne. Off the back of the proposals being presented to Scrutiny and Cabinet, Councillor Bourne took up the responsibility of working to provide a solution on a cross-party basis. I believe the Task and Finish group did try to do that. And I know that a number of members on that group put in a lot of time and effort to achieve it. And I think that kind of theme of responsibility is where I want to sort of speak this evening. And in fact, hearing from Councillor Oxford, it's clear that he takes on that responsibility to see what the wider implications are for statutory and non-statutory services, and where savings can be made and additional income brought in, looking at the challenges that face us. But I want to speak to those who are opposed to these proposals as well. And I don't doubt that these proposals are difficult to stomach, and we're in challenging times. I'd like to thank officers for their work on this, and that work is considerable with the Task and Finish group. And I know there are officers on this meeting tonight who've had, this is their third evening this week where they've been supporting councillors and this council, but also those officers that worked in preparing all those papers, looking at the models and the options available to us. I think what's clear is that Conservative councillors consistently disregard looking at what other councils do. And I don't know why. Sharing knowledge across local government is surely a good thing to do. Why wouldn't we want to learn from others? Lots of other councils come to us to see the good work that we do, and it's testament in the many awards that we've been nominated for and won in recent years, and that they do that. We've been working with, we have to work closely with other local councils on a range of issues. And we're going to be working much more closely with them in the future. What always strikes me is just how bad relationships are between Colchester Conservatives and their counterparts in neighbouring authorities. That doesn't bode well for them as we begin to negotiate and build new council structures in the coming months and years. Conservative councillors talk lots about money that's already been spent, but not once since I've been on the council have they put forward an alternative budget, despite having the time and the resources to do so. I don't know why they wouldn't, But increasingly, I think that they're afraid to tell local residents what they would do. We know the sorts of cuts that Conservatives make, though, because we've got examples from across Essex. Cuts to library services, cuts to support for disabled children, cuts to services for older people, cutting bus routes, leaving people isolated. They closed children's centres and they shut down youth provision. Are these the sorts of cuts that they would make if they took over control of Colchester Borough Council? Where would they wield the axe? Cuts to the grants we make to our nationally recognised arts and cultural organisations? Would they cut the support we provide to those experiencing homelessness and our council built homes programme to deliver affordable homes for local residents? Would they cut our award-winning parks like Castle Park and Highwoods Country Park? Or cut our museum service and projects that secure our heritage and history for future generations? Or perhaps more alarmingly, would they raise council tax by over 15%? Because that's what would be needed to deal with the scale of the financial hit that COVID-19 has caused. Councillor Bourne also raised the information being provided by Councillor King and officers to assist all councillors to deliberate on the budget options available to us. The first budget workshop was attended by a number of councillors from all political parties, but only 2 out of 22 Conservative councillors attended. It's clear to me that collectively, Colchester Conservatives don't want to do the work and they don't want to take responsibility. My biggest worry is that they won't even be honest with people. And if they're not willing to be honest with the people of Colchester, then I dread to think what they might have planned if they ever took over control of this council. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Fox. I do agree with you on a number of those matters. It is about responsibility. And we've taken responsibility. We've taken it on a number of nights over the last month, really, to explain to people, to explain to councillors, to explain to the public. And I do think we're right to discuss the responsible options that are available. And I think you're right to pick out the people that have been responsible and have not been. And I thank those who have served on the group, but also people who have put forward, like Councillor Oxford, the motion wanting to participate in the work going forward to help make those responsible decisions. And it's responsible to listen, and we have done. We've enabled that scrutiny work to occur, that task and finish group to respond back. And I think it's about listening now to what we can do of those recommendations and what we feel is right to end at this point. So if I can sum up, because I don't think we've got any other comments waiting, any other councillors. So thank you all for your contributions. It really has been a thorough exercise where we've entertained which possibilities we can and asked residents to contribute to. Councillor King has shown that we still need to take some more decisions going forward that will affect what we can do as a council. We deserve more support, as promised, from ministers in this government, and we will still lobby for more support for Colchester's residents. In the meantime, we will do that work that has been started by the Task and Finish Group, and we will carry on with the budget group exercises that Councillor King has started. So, as Councillor Goss recommends, I think we take some of the recommendations in principle, but actually we thank the Task and Finish Group for their work. Thank you to the Chair for coming this evening and representing that whole group and putting forward the recommendations as best as could be brought, but also understand there was no consensus to take it forward. So on that basis, we won't take forward recommendation A and B or C. I think that we can take in principle and understand that we will continue to work with ward councillors and the work that has been explained to talk more about the options we have, wheelie bins and their effect on staff and their possible evidence-led approach of that. But we also know that some streets and wards around our borough will not be suitable for them. But also E was discussed at length tonight as well, which was the recruitment programme. And actually, I think that's been answered. So we can accept that in a sense that we have answered that this evening. So what I would say is that with the steer from Councillor Goss, we thank the Task and Finish Group, and we take those recommendations and do not actually take forward A, B, C, and say that in principle going forward, D would always be something that we take forward, which is involving all councillors, which we have done on the Task and Finish Group and Scrutiny and this evening. And that E has already been tasked. So therefore, can I put that to you, councillors, that we take in spirit and thank the work the Task and Finish Group has done, but we stop the garden waste work at this point. We take in principle recommendation D, and we do not move forward with the other recommendations. Are there any comments on that? Is that clear? Okay, thank you. I hope I've summarised that effectively. And Richard, is that clear to you?
I've noted down, Chairman, that you're not proceeding with A, B, C or E, and that D will go forward as an in-principle decision that you will take forward.
Thank you.
In future.
Again, I'll just check if councillors are happy with that. Please tell me if you are not. Okay, thank you. Therefore, I'll go to Andrew Weavers for a vote on that, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So we are voting on recommendation 2.1 and to accept in principle recommendation D from the Task and Finish Group. Councillor Fox.
4.
4. Councillor Goss.
4.
4. Councillor Higgins.
4.
4. Councillor King.
4.
4. Councillor Lilly.
4.
4. Councillor Young.
Sorry, 4.
4. Councillor Corey.
4.
4. That's unanimous, Chairman. Chairman, you have two other recommendations to consider. 2.2 and 2.3 that you need to formally dispose of.
Could we bring those up again, please? Thank you. Oh yes, so item 2.2 is the original policy that we are stopping. And then, so do we need to vote on that separately?
Yes, Chairman.
Okay, so we'll vote on 2.2 now, please. That was the policy that we are agreeing to stop.
Right then, so recommendation 2.2, the recommendation is to not take forward the recommendations contained in that report.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Councillor Fox.
4.
4. Councillor Goss.
4.
4. Councillor Higgins.
4.
4. Councillor King.
4.
4. Councillor Lilly.
4.
4. Councillor Young.
4.
4. And Councillor Corey.
4.
4. So that's unanimous, Chairman. And do you want to agree the recommendations contained in 2.3, or do you wish to note them?
No.
Yes, we'll note them. Thank you. They are positive.
Shall we take that as a collective yes, then, Chairman? Or do you want to go to a formal vote on that?
Yeah.
No. I think we can note that there's not any actions that we have not already agreed in there, which I think is to thank the group, to thank the officers, and then the budget workshops are already in task. So I'd say we can note that.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So thank you for that that discussion. I think it's clear that we've accepted all of the hard work of the Task and Finish Group and acknowledge those recommendations, but have not taken those forward. We understand in principle working in wards, asking people, and would take forward that work, talking further about the rights or wrongs of wheelie bins. But thank you, councillors. The next item, I think, was just to see whether we need to expel the public in order to discuss the private part of the minutes. But I feel that actually we've agreed those minutes. Are we happy that we've agreed those, including the confidential items in the first part of this meeting, and therefore do not need to go into private session? Is that okay, Richard Clifford?
If you don't feel the need to go into private session to discuss the minutes, and you're happy just to approve them, we could do that now.
Can we approve those now, councillors? Are you happy?
Yeah.
Okay, can we have a vote then, please, Andrew, just to be clear on that?
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Councillor Fox?
For.
For. Councillor Goss?
4.
For. Councillor Higgins?
For.
For. Councillor King?
4.
For. Councillor Lilly?
4.
For. Councillor Young?
4.
For. And Councillor Corey?
4.
4. That's a unanimous, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Therefore, there are no other items on the agenda because we've covered that. So I can just thank you all for this evening and your contributions and bid you good night. Thank you all and good night.